I am fantasy author Elle Penelope, and welcome to My Imaginary Friends, a look behind the scenes at an author mapping the worlds in my head and making them a reality. Hello, friends. Today is Friday, May 17th, 2019, and this is episode 14 of My Imaginary Friends. I'm Leslie. So this week's best thing, I have been plotting. Plotting is the week's best thing because I realized, or I remembered, how much I love it. And it feels like being in a book, like being a writer, like this is the process. As kind of crazy and messy as it is, this is part of what I love about writing. So I am plotting book 4 of the Earthsinger Chronicles. I'm actually plotting 3.5 and 4 at the same time. So the novellas are generally prequels to the next book. And 3.5 will be a direct prequel to 4, even though it takes place 500 years in the past. It's going to explain some really important things. And the challenge is to make it necessary but optional, because I'm self-publishing all of the novellas in between the major books that are published by St. Martin's Press. And so, there's a lot of people who may see the books on a bookshelf or however if they're not on bookshelves, whatever. But they're not going to know that the novellas exist. I can't assume that everyone who reads the main books in the series are going to read the novellas. But they still need to have an important place in the story. And they do. But it's always a challenge. That's why they're prequels, so that I can do that. And the people who do know about them and who do read the books and are like me, like if I read a book that I really like, then I go and try to find out everything I can about the author and whatever they've written. So I know like Leslie as a reader would find these and be like, oh, there's more, there's prequels, but everybody's not like that. And so it is a challenge. And then how much do I retell in book 4 of the really important things that happen in the novella? And I just went through this with book 3, in that I had written the second novella, book 2.5, at least the first draft. There's I don't know how clean it is. I haven't read it in a while, but I know exactly what happens. I've written a draft of it years ago. And, but in book 3, one of the characters from the novella, who's introduced in the novella, has to do a brief recap of everything that happened. So people who didn't read it, know. And people who did read it, hopefully they're not too bored during this recap. Or maybe it'll be a refresher. I mean, nobody's read it yet because it hasn't come out yet, but you know what I'm saying. So I guess everything is still in the beginning stages right now. So I don't know how much you'll even need to know or need to recap in book 4. And that I'm hoping that just having that knowledge gives you a deeper and richer experience of reading book 4, but still an optional one. And so it's coming along slowly. So I wanted to just go over how I approach the plotting of a new book. It's the first brand new book I have written in years, like of any length. I've written short stories and novellas not in this series in the past couple of years, but I did write the first novella from scratch last fall. So, but that was only 25,000 words, I think. And I don't know, the second novella is about 25,000 words also. This one feels like it might be longer, but I'm still going through it. So my first day of what I consider plotting. So I was doing a lot of brainstorming last week, but Monday I really started the plotting. And so since it's the 4th book, and there are a lot of characters that have had POVs in the previous books by this point, and I'm closing in on who gets the POVs. And so how I approached it was, the first thing I did was I just listed all of the questions that I have about book 4. Like, there's certain characters, where have they been? What have they been doing in the interim? If we have seen them, if we haven't seen them, in book 3. So I listed out all the characters who either have had POVs or could potentially have a POV in this book. And I made a spreadsheet with their character name, their theme. So previously, when I I actually had this for a while. I have listed, basically there's 6 main themes in the series. And I realized that all of the characters correspond to one or two themes. So I listed their theme. Then at the beginning of book 4, what is their internal desire? What is the internal conflict or the lie that they have? What is their, I have a column that it's mostly empty because I'm not sure if this is a real thing or not, but what is the plan to get their internal desire fulfilled? What's the lesson they have to learn in order to fulfill their inner desire? Then I list their external goals, their external goal, their external conflict, and then their external plan to fulfill their external goal. And then the type of arc that they have, if they're going to have an arc in book 4, whether it's positive, negative, or flat. And so I have like 15, 4, 6, 8, 10, 13. I have 13 characters on this spreadsheet. And it's, not possible for all of them to get a POV. It is possible, but I don't want to write that kind of book. So it became clearer through this process that, right now I have marked next to them, I've got 6.5. So mostly 6 characters that have some sort of positive change arc. Other characters have more flat arcs. They're not really going to change. They're already emotionally, character-wise where they need to be. And they're just going to be pushing things along. So the characters that have the positive change arcs, and one has a negative change arc, and I don't know if he's going to get a POV or not. He hasn't had one in any of the books so far. So yeah, I don't know if he needs one. Right now I'm saying no, but we'll see. So that process really clarified for me, who needs to learn something in this book, and what they need to learn, and just starting to think about how it fits into the things that have to happen in the book. And it all kind of comes back to theme. So I was thinking then I would maybe plot by the theme, but I had an immediate resistance to that idea. So for example, one of the themes in the book is redemption. And we've seen redemption by this point as a theme in book 2 and book 3 for certain characters. And for certain characters, it's going to take them more than one book to find their redemption. Others have found it already previously. And so the redemption, I was thinking, could I do it as like a whole plot line is about that? But that doesn't seem to be making sense to me. Like I said, I had an immediate, as soon as I had the thought, I was like, no, that's not right. So I'll have to honor that. But I'm still not at the point where I know exactly, after a week of plotting, where the pieces are going to be, who's going to be doing what when. But that's coming. And it's just so amazing and refreshing and fun to have these realizations as I go through these processes and these discoveries about the character. Like Jasminda, who is the main character of book 1, I realized what her transformation in this book has to be, and I didn't go in knowing that. And it's there. Like all of the stuff I feel like is there. Like I really believe that this whole book exists in my subconscious as a fully formed thing. And so what I'm trying to do is tap into the thing that exists and make it a reality. So the next thing that I did the next day was to go through. So then I was like, okay, I needed to focus on the third novella, book 3.5. And before I can really get deep into book 4, because I had all of those questions that I had made, and some of them have their roots in this novella, in the prequel. So, like I've said before, Whispers of Shadow and Flame, the second book in the series, has chapter epigraphs that very loosely tell the story of the third novella in a kind of a vague, poetic way. So I went through those epigraphs and looked at what I had written, because I had a basic outline, and tried to make it more, solidify it, and ran into some potential issues, I tried to keep it vague so that I wouldn't write myself into a corner. Even as I knew what would happen, I never know what really happens until I write it. So, I got those details down and then put them into the story grid structure. So my basic story grid structure is the desire, the inciting incident, the progressive complications, the turning point, the crisis, the climax, and the resolution. And so that's kind of my initial high level view of what a story is, a certain plot line or a certain subplot or whatever, what, that part of the story is. And I have something, and every day I've kind of gone back and gone through it and tried to refine it, because at the same time, I'm looking at these actions that take place. You can't divorce them from character, and you can't divorce them from theme. So character, plot, and theme all work together. And so while I'm working on the actual plot, it's like, okay, so what does this mean about this character? Who does this character have to be? Does that match what the little bits of that we've seen about her so far? And does that feel right to me? And I came up with 2 options of who she is. And I'm not talking about really characteristics, like, is she kind? I that's part of it. But like what her arc is, I guess, what does she have to learn? I figured out what she wants, and it's also subject to change, but generally what she wants has always been there. It's always been in the back of my mind, and it makes sense based on the backstory that is already at this point canon. And so once I have the desire, then you have to have the wound. The wound is pretty obvious from previous books in the series. And so it's just then, what does she do with that? That's the core of this character. And so I know that, and I know the actions, and then it still has to mesh up in a certain way, which is part of the challenge. And so right now it's more like iterating the things that I figured out, tweaking them and fleshing them out. So the third day I was looking at, the main character of the novella, her lie, which is her wound, or the knot, different ways of approaching character use different terminology. And so sometimes it's helpful for me to start in one way, like start with Michael Haig's character development. So he has a belief, a wound. I can't remember all of them right now, but he's got a format for showing the character arc and the development of the character, and then maybe move to a different book like Plot versus Character by Jeff Gerke, which is an earlier book that I read that really resonated with me, and he calls that character problem the knot, as opposed to the wound. And then K.M. Weiland, in Creating Character Arts, calls it the lie. And these are all the same idea. And so what is that problem at the core that fuels the internal desire and the internal conflict? And so going through and finding that, so then I moved into K.M. Weiland's method, where she does the lie, the truth, the wants, and the needs. And most of these people are saying the same thing in different ways. And so when I get stuck, or I go down one path, it's kind of like testing it with another method. So if I fill out, and I have spreadsheets for everything. So one of them is the Michael Haig method, and I have a spreadsheet for that. And then I fill that out to the best of my ability at this point in time, and then take another look at it through K.M. Weiland's method, and do that. And then maybe in a few days, take another look at it through a different method of creating character. There's a great method in the back of the Negative Character Thesaurus. There is a reverse backstory tool / worksheet, which I've incorporated into my master spreadsheet, that is also really interesting and approaches it from a different way. So I've, over the past few years, developed this. At this point, I think it's an 8 or 9 tab spreadsheet that has, each sheet has a different thing in it. So the first one is a basic GMC, goal, motivation, and conflict sheet. I've got the Michael Haig in there. I've got a Save the Cat outline format in there. I have Dan Wells' 7-point plot structure in there. So every time, not every time, but if I come across a new method of something that I really resonate with, then I'll add it to my spreadsheet. And it allows me to approach the problem from different angles and from different perspectives through different either plotting or character methods. And so I don't I never fill out every tab of the spreadsheet. Usually the GMC, the Michael Haig characters, and then I sort of do the 7-point plot structure, the Dan Wells system, and that's enough to get me started on a first draft. And then during revision, I'll go back to the spreadsheet and maybe fill out 1 or 2 of the other tabs and take another look at it. So because I know whatever I come up with as for this plot is going to change, I don't try to be incredibly detailed about it. But these systems sort of spark my mind and fill in gaps, you know? And so I looked at this character and her arc and what it's going to be, and I still haven't figured it out. But I did make some really interesting discoveries, which I'm super excited about. And that just, just feel really fun. So yeah, the next steps are just to keep reviewing and tightening it, keep looking at it from different ways until I can nail down, I think after the high level story grid outline, I go into more of a Save the Cat beat sheet outline, which is instead of just 6 or 7 points, it gives you maybe 10 or 12. And after that is good, then I can go into a more detailed outline. And that's where I start breaking things down into scenes. And still at a high level and describing scenes. That might still be a couple weeks away because that's the last step. And I might need some more moodling time. I might need some more just brainstorming time. There's a couple of movies that I want to watch for their general plot structure and, kind of character development structure that I might want to mine from, like ideas that have come to me during this process. It's like, oh, what if I, for example, I'm thinking of doing a negative change arc. And so looking at movies with negative character arcs. I've never read Wuthering Heights, and I don't think I've ever seen a movie of Wuthering Heights either, but that's on my list of things to watch. And I don't know whether I'm actually going to do a negative change arc. I was talking through it this morning in my mastermind, and as interesting as it is to me, it's more like it's interesting because I've never done it before. But I have a lot of concern about it fitting into the series that I've written. Like I need a character to try to find redemption, but not ever be a villain. At least this character. So a negative arc kind of presupposes that I'm turning her into a villain, and then I'm going to redeem her. And it's more complicated than that, But I'm still intrigued by negative character arcs. And so I think I'll still just do the research, and all of it goes into the file and it gets filtered out into something in the future. So I do have to have input, and input is always going to be important. Also planning to read some books. I'm not strategically reading anything. I'm just sort of reading around things I've been meaning to read for a while. For example, I finally read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which of course was fabulous. It's won all of the awards. I knew it was going to be fabulous, but I was also concerned that it might be like damaging to me. Like N.K. Jemisin doesn't care about your feelings. But it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as like depressing or whatever as I thought it might be. It was really fantastic, and she does really cool things with the narration. A large part of it is in second person. I believe it's all in present tense. And looking at the reasons why, like it makes perfect sense. And the second person POV told by a narrator, like you get from the very beginning, from the preface, you get this narrative voice, not an authorial voice, but there is a narrator telling you this story. And because part of it is you. Now, when the narrator is saying you, the narrator is talking about the character. But it all works together in a really interesting way that, feels very purposeful and very meaningful. And, I do think that choice of tense, choice of the type of POV, first, second, or third, it has to be like that. It has to be for the story. It has to make sense for the story. I primarily write in third person past tense for most of Earthsinger. My other series, my contemporary paranormal romance series, is first person. I think it's present tense. And but I do play around with in the Earthsinger books, different tenses. The visions are in first person, and the most of the narrative is in third person. And I do have reasons for that. Like when you are for example, when you're in the Queen's perspective, it's present, it's first person, it's different than everything else because of her experience. And so that becomes part of it. And I think that's intuitive for me. Like I do think about it and I make a decision that feels right. What am I trying to convey with the type of narration? And so in the 5th season, the choice to have a narrator is really interesting to me. And I've thought about that for other things because it adds something. And so you're not in a deep POV, like a lot of romance and a lot of articles and workshops and things talk about getting into a deep POV and there's word choices that go into that. And, a lot of craft things go into that. But that book is not in a deep POV. It's not even omniscient. Is it omniscient? I have to go back and look. But I just remember while reading it, being struck by the choice of who is telling the story, who are they telling it to, and how is it being told? And that was actually one of the biggest lessons I learned from Junot Diaz. I took a workshop with him at VONA in 2013. And literally the week after I came back home from that workshop, I wrote the first draft of Song of Blood and Stone in 2 days. I was so inspired. I was just brimming with inspiration. It was an amazing workshop. And partially because I sort of got crucified at my workshop. Like I had brought in this other story that I was working on, the first, chapter, whatever we were workshopping, and he just tore it apart to the point where I have not touched that book in the past 6 years. But it was a great experience because I learned so much. And it was like that particular book was first person, and I guess it wasn't, I was not as good a writer then, and it wasn't very deep POV. And he just was stressing who was telling the story. If it's a first person narrator telling the story, well, who is she telling it to and why? And that, once you know that, I hadn't thought about that before at that time. But once you know that, it informs so many of the decisions that you make in the story. And so, eventually, one day, I will return to that story because I love it. I love all the stories that I have on the drive that haven't been finished. But now I do. I think about who's telling the story and why. Even if in this, where there's, Earthsinger Chronicles, there's no narrator, it's third person. I try for deep POV, but it comes in and out, and there's reasons why you want it to be very deep inside the person's head and then move the camera out for like a wide shot. Anyway, that is what has been keeping me busy this past week. I will continue to plot and discover and find things out and then start the writing. It's invigorating though. Like I wish, and I might make a note for the future, that when I'm in this brainstorming plotting process, to try to clear my schedule. Like this would be the perfect time for a retreat, just go away and focus on nothing but this for a few days. Right now I do have like several work projects and a big one ramping up. And so I feel like I'm splitting my time, which is always the way. But if I can schedule it so that the next book that I plot, I just maybe take a week off or go somewhere, check myself into a hotel or something, and then just give all of my mental energy to this. That could backfire. It could be extremely exhausting, but, and I know that I do benefit from time off, but like, I feel like right now I might benefit more from just digging in, immersing myself in it completely 100%, and then coming on the other side. So we'll see if we can make that happen one day. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you next week. Until then, happy reading. For episode show notes and to learn more about me and my books, go to lpenelope.com. Subscribe to My Imaginary Friends wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the video episodes on YouTube. Please leave a rating and review to help support the show.